Do you ever feel like schools are being used as a shock absorber for the entire digital age?
We aren't just managing classrooms anymore. We're managing the legal, logistical, and psychological boundaries of the internet. And right now, the pressure is reaching a boiling point.
Westminster takes the headlines, Ofcom gets the new enforcement powers, and Ofsted gets yet another new area to inspect your school phone policies at every single visit. But the actual friction, the daily exhaustion of enforcing it, that slides very quietly right down onto the head teacher's desk. Today, we're going to be removing the political spin, and we're not here to debate whether the ban is right or wrong. We're talking about the cognitive load this puts on the adults in your school building. And how do we embrace technology without letting it drain the people responsible for making it work?
Welcome back to Being the Head. I'm Jackie.
And I'm Jane. And today we're talking about technology, but probably not in the way most people expect. This isn't another conversation about whether AI is good or bad. And it isn't another debate about mobile phone bans. It's about what happens when schools are expected to manage an increasingly complicated digital world while still doing everything else.
And we're delighted to be joined by two brilliant guests from South Australia. Tony Maddock is the head of middle school at Southern Montessori School, and Rachel McCall is deputy principal at Woodcroft College. Together, they host an excellent podcast called Stepping into Ed Leadership, where they have some really honest conversations about leadership, culture, and supporting staff through change.
Tony and Rachel, welcome to Being the Head.
Thank you so much for having us.
Absolutely delighted to be here.
Okay, so let's look at the reality of legislation, because from June 29th, the non-statutory guidance is dead. State-funded schools in England have a legal duty to be mobile phone friendly by default throughout the entire school day.
And let's be honest about what by default actually means in practice. It means if you aren't a phone-free environment, you need an exceptionally good, legally defensible reason. Add to that the fact Ofsted is now explicitly instructed to assess your phone policy and its implementation during every single inspection. And that margin for error has evaporated.
And while you're rewriting your behaviour policy to turn mobile phones into searchable confiscated items, you're also supposed to be prepping parents for the broader under 16 social media ban modelled on Australia.
The data coming out of Australia's trial is already proving what head teachers knew all along. Compliance drops massively among older teens and VPN downloads skyrocket. When children bypass age assurance tech at home, who deals with the cyberbullying and the sleep-deprived drama the next morning? Well, that's the school's pastoral team.
It's a classic shift of enforcement friction. The government sets a boundary, but the school leader has to police the border. They become a non-stop drain on leadership stamina.
So, Tony, we're going to start with you. When school leaders hear phrases like AI, virtual reality, and emerging technology, what do you think they're actually worried about? And where do you see leaders getting stuck?
I don't actually think they're worried about the technology itself. I think what they're actually worried about is the impact it's going to have on learning, the workload, the ethical considerations, and also the control that they're going to have over the technology. There's often a fear that technology that moves faster than a school's ability to respond thoughtfully. So leaders are asking, will this improve learning or distract from it? Will it reduce thinking or deepen it? Will teachers feel supported, or will this become another thing already added to a very full plate? So there are some very real concerns about academic integrity, student safety and privacy, equity, and whether staff have the confidence and the professional learning needed to use these tools well for learning. But I do think the deeper worry is, are we preparing the students for a world that they are entering without losing the human, relational, the reflective parts of education that matter most? So where I see leaders getting stuck is the space between the urgency and the overwhelm. So they know emerging technology can't be ignored, but they also know schools are already complex systems. So the response can be either reactive or avoidant. Some schools rush towards the newest tool without a clear learning purpose. Others hold back because of the ethical, practical workload implications, and it feels too big. So leaders can also get stuck by thinking they need to have all the answers before they begin. But with emerging technology, the work is less about having a perfect policy from day one and more about creating conditions for thoughtful experimentation. So it means leaders need to be asking better questions like, what learning problem are we trying to solve? What cognitive work should students be doing? What work can the technology support, extend, or make visible? And how do we protect teacher bandwidth while still building capacity? For me, the leadership challenge is simply not about introducing AI or virtual reality. It's about helping the school community slow down enough to be intentional while still moving forward.
There is a lot there to unpack, but can you think of a time when a piece of technology promised to make life easier but actually created more work?
Yeah, uh, absolutely. I think AI is an obvious choice here because it promises efficiency, but often creates a whole new layer of decision making. In reality, AI often creates more work at first because it doesn't necessarily have to remove thinking, but it changes where the thinking happens. So instead of starting with a blank page, teachers and leaders are now reviewing outputs, checking accuracy, refining prompts, adjusting tone, protecting privacy, and deciding whether the work still reflects the learner's own thinking, which I think is a very dominant space in the AI space here. So the workload shifts from creation to curation and judgment in the AI space. But I also think another piece of technology that falls into this same category is potentially learning management systems. Learning management platforms are introduced with the promise of streamlining communication, assessment, feedback, and access to learning. And in many ways, they do that. But I think they can also quietly create a whole new layer of work for teachers. Instead of reducing workload, they can potentially multiply the places where teachers need to update, monitor, and respond. So the task is no longer just planning the lesson or assessing the work. It becomes uploading resources, formatting instructions, checking submissions, responding to messages, updating grades, managing notifications, and making sure that students and families are on top of everything. So the workload there shifts from teaching and assessing to teaching and assessing and managing the platform and managing and maintaining the digital trail. So I think where leaders need to be really careful is where technology can be incredibly useful, but only when it's implemented with a clear purpose and an honest understanding of the extra invisible labor that it may create.
Thank you, Tony. While I was listening to that, I was just thinking of the many times that we've shifted for different management systems in our schools and the workload that has created to learn a new system and also to unpick it as you're migrating the information over for the admin people. That's always been a big bugbear. So have we actually gone forward with our technology or have we just created more? And I think every school leader there will be nodding along with that. Rachel, I want to shift to you now. You've spoken about walking alongside teachers rather than managing them from a distance. When staff are already tired and stretched, how do you think leaders help people navigate constant digital change without getting them so overwhelmed with it all? How do you think they go about that?
Yeah, I think it's a huge challenge for leaders. And I think, as with many things, part of the leader's role is really to protect their staff. I know I get a million emails about different products all the time that promise everything. And, I've certainly accepted that no product's going to solve everything. There's no silver bullet out there that's going to be amazing. And I mean, there are a huge range of learning management systems, as Tony's already talked about, which do promise lots of things. And, it's about being really intentional with purpose. When we introduce a learning management system, is it to enhance teaching or learning, or is it to make communication with parents really easy? Is it trying to do both? And it really is about creating time for staff to be able to do it. As you said, adopting any kind of new system is overwhelming and takes a really long time. So I always want to try and provide clarity for staff. And I think this space is so difficult to do that because we are changing things all the time. There are different systems coming in place. You think you've got a system that's working well and everyone's using it and confident with it. We have moved to a lot of online examinations in senior school in South Australia, and the sort of government department that runs that has a lockdown browser, which is, in theory, completely locking anything else out. But schools themselves don't have that. And so there's, it's trialing different products that are going to hopefully give that kind of environment so students can practice that and staff can be confident in the reliability and validity of student work that's completed through that. But you mentioned at the top of the program about students finding workarounds, and it is a constant battle at the moment with students finding workarounds for different things. And, people think they're holding this test or this assignment in a lockdown environment, but it's that they then go, hang on, there's no way this student wrote this. There must be something they've accessed, and how, and, short of shutting everything down, it's really, really tricky. So I think that walking along staff is really understanding what is happening in the classroom on a day-to-day basis and what they're facing, and the constantly evolving nature, I guess, of technology and what's happening and what students are using. And as I said, trying to provide clarity where you can, and always trying to provide support. But coming back to that protection piece, I think it's really being conscious of what you do introduce or what you trial is really intentional and not just bombarding them with a million new things all the time. And so if we're going to introduce something school-wide, and obviously Tony and I both work at independent schools, so we have a lot of autonomy in the types of systems we're going to be introducing in the department. Schools in Australia, they have certain systems, so that's not a school level decision. But we do have that autonomy about introducing new things, but it really is about being very, very intentional about what might be introduced and how it's being introduced, and creating time and support for staff to be able to get their heads around it.
I think you actually hit the nail on the head there, haven't you, really, Rachel? It's about time, because you can quite easily get into a system where you're doing a knee-jerk reaction to it. This is the problem. Let's solve it with a bit of technology. But actually, it takes a long time to get used to that technology and how you're going to use it, and make sure that those people who are going to be on that chalk face can have the time to benefit from it, but also ultimately that the children are going to actually have a better outcome because of that piece of technology. I mean, I was thinking back to what we've got at the moment with the Year 4 multiplication times table checker that we put into schools. And that is all about the children being able to react to a question that's flashed up on the screen very quickly. And a lot of my different challenges is around data when I go into schools and questioning them about that data. And a lot of the times when I question them about their dip in multiplication checker, it's about their use of the technology. It's not about their knowledge of times table and be able to react to it. They can do that, hands down. It's actually getting them used to and practicing. And is that a way forward for our children if actually the barrier for them to succeed is the technology and not their brain? What have you found helps people engage with the change rather than simply endure it then? Have you found anything that works?
I think where consultation is possible. I think that's really important. I think you want to find your early adopters. You're always going to have people who enjoy playing with technology in a school, and that's a bit of a hobby for them. They like exploring new products and things like that. So I would always sort of advocate for a sort of a pilot system, just so that you're as informed as possible before introducing something. And if you've had a small group of teachers in the classroom working with students with a particular product or tool that you're considering introducing, having them really sort of test it out and be able to, nut out some of the problems or the tricks or the tips, or, what is actually enhancing learning and teaching, rather than just going, we're going to use all these different elements of a particular tool, I think is really important. Because when you front the staff and have, we're moving to this particular system, to be able to have their colleagues who have been using it with students and can share what they found really effective, what they found a waste of time, what they have found the students have really benefited from or enjoyed, and what's not worth bothering with, is a really valuable way to introduce something. I think it's, having a top-down approach of we're bringing in this sort of system is never going to be successful, because your staff are looking at you going, well, you've got one class. How do you know what this is going to look like for a teacher with, 5 classes and hundreds of students on their roll book and things like that. So I think involving sort of small groups of people, piloting things, and then having a really intentional rollout. Like this is kind of what we did with our most recent learning management system, where we had a rollout of, minimum expectations of what we were all going to be trying and exploring with the students. Because, it's that balance between, you don't want it just about compliance and people are pointlessly sort of ticking a box, but you also do want an element of consistency for the students, so that they're not going, what's this teacher doing completely differently with this particular learning management system when I walk in that classroom? And also supporting the parents to be able to support their children by knowing where they can access information about what's been happening in class as well. So I think that starting small, having really clear sort of expectations and steps, again, coming back to clarity around the purpose of why we're moving to it, what we're hoping to get out of it, but also really wrapping that with support. We have a fantastic head of e-learning, and he's freed up a lot of his timetable to be able to sit alongside staff, and they can book him whenever they have a free lesson to sit down and go through something, so that they don't have to feel that they're struggling on their own. So making sure you do as much as possible create time, but also really wrap support around any new introduction.
Yeah, so vital. I mean, 2 massively valid points there. Making sure you have that time, first one, and then also making sure you collaborate, because a top-down system does not work, because ultimately they're going to be the ones that are going to be using it for the benefit of the children. So, yeah, thanks for that, Rachel. I really think that's vital information. Thank you. I'd like to thank you, Rachel. I mean, that was so interesting about the AI, the way that you're working with it to check that those things that the teachers are working with is actually supporting the children's learning, but also the fact that AI is working with you rather than against you, and that the children are using it accurately. It's absolutely fascinating. I don't know where we are in the UK of that. I know I've looked at my son, and he's got something that tracks AI and can tell you, and then he can also spot different things, and he'll say that's definitely fake. Yeah, and I'm completely agog about it, really, and I don't know whether the teaching profession is keeping up with how quickly our students are adapting to AI and using it for their benefit, as well as it having a negative effect. I'm not sure we're quite there yet, or will ever be there as teachers, but we have to give them the time to learn, don't we? This is what I think you're saying, is making sure that we do actually adapt and change, and also produce teachers, work with teachers in order to get that right for the students. I'm really interested now to think about, we've looked at AI, we've looked at technology, and we've talked about things where it's going wrong. But I'm sure, Tony, there are lots of things that schools are doing really well with technology right now. What do you think they're doing well, first of all?
Well, yeah, I think you're certainly right, Jackie. Giving them time to learn the technology is hugely important. And I think one thing schools are beginning to do well is recognizing that we just can't ban, avoid, or ignore the emerging technology. Our students are already living in a world which is shaped by AI, algorithms, and immersive media, and they already have an understanding of it, as you just touched on, where we perhaps don't. So part of our responsibility as teachers or at schools is to teach them how to use the technology ethically, responsibly, and thoughtfully. So for me, the goal isn't to keep technology completely out of learning. The goal is to help students understand when the technology can actually support their thinking and when it might start replacing their thinking. And they really need to question that. So they need to ask themselves, I really feel strongly that we need to teach students to ask themselves, is this ethical? Is this accurate? Is it helping me think more deeply, or is it doing the thinking for me? Have I protected my own voice, my own judgment, and my own responsibility as a learner? I think that's where teachers take a lot of the burden on, is that they try and do that for the student. And I really think we need to be teaching the students how to do that for themselves. And I guess that's where that idea of cognitive atrophy comes into it, and it's really important. We've already sort of touched on this as well through our conversation. But if the students do use the technology to bypass their own thinking, and that's what we're seeing a lot in the English and the humanities, where they're asking technology to do a lot of the planning, the questioning, and the problem solving, that's where we're really risking weakening the skills that we're trying to develop. But if we do see technology as a thought partner, and we already know that it can deepen our teacher workload, and we're asking teachers to redevelop tasks. So, if we have a homework task and then they use AI and the task is sort of designed for that at this moment, we can't really be upset that they're using the tool. I know I would if I had it at my disposal. Let's all be honest. We're going to use whatever tools we have at our disposal. So we already know that having technology as a thought partner can make life more difficult for teachers. But if we flip that, we can actually, and we help the students to use the technology responsibly and ethically, then it can actually strengthen learning. It's got some real opportunities there as well. So it can help students to generate ideas, to test assumptions, to receive feedback, and explore different perspectives rather than their own, and make their thinking more visible if we can set it up properly by providing teachers support and also teaching the students how important it is.
My one question, Tony, back to you at this is, are we able to do that as teachers? Have we got the more knowledge than the students have on AI? Where are we getting our training from?
Yeah, exactly. We know growing up and the internet came in, and then our own grandparents had no idea, or they still don't have any idea what the internet is. And how do you explain what the internet is to someone that doesn't understand it? I don't know. So no, I do not believe that we know more than the students who are already using this as part of their everyday life. But I do think where we are getting it wrong is when we do have that top-down approach to focus purely on control of the technology. And I think that's a knee-jerk reaction when we don't understand as much as the kids at our schools understand. I feel like where schools are getting it wrong is where we're just purely focusing on locking it down. How do we catch misuse? How do we block access to these things? And they are really, really valid concerns, but it can't be a whole strategy for a school. So if we only focus on restriction, we do really miss out on opportunities to teach discernment on the technology. So I don't have an answer on how do we train teachers. I think what Rachel was saying before and what she touched on is small numbers, piloting different things, finding out what really works, consultation, time, all hugely, hugely important. And it does have a huge impact on the leadership, because leaders are now really having to hold two truths at the same time. On one hand, we're trying to prepare students for a world where technology is already existing and is only going to continue to evolve. And on the other hand, we're protecting the integrity of learning and the well-being of staff and the cognitive development of students. So it is a really, really tricky balance.
So I think, Tony, what you're saying is we have to embrace it because technology is going to evolve. But what we need
And that's
to
not
teach it.
that's not what we want to hear as teachers, is it? But it's
No,
hugely important.
we have.
We have to prepare students for a world that's different to what ours was when we left school. So we
Yeah.
have to embrace it.
Yeah. But at the same time, we can teach pupils to have that judgment as well about how to use it, is what you're saying. Is actually, if we do this total lockdown where you ban it totally, we're not preparing children for the future, or pupils or students for the future, are we? If we're just having that total lockdown. I don't know, Jane. I've not heard us having a debate on this conversation with leaders
No, I think
the
and I
way
think
that
it's
I think
on.
Australia are.
It should be alongside it, as well as using the technology and teaching them to be safe. I think it's the ethical piece that seems to be missing, and giving the children that, and young adults, that authority and autonomy, and to be able to do that, but within a structured, taught ethical approach, because it is about efficacy at the end of the day, and it's not going away.
No, and that's it. When we think about, we're preparing students to go out into a world where it is there, that idea of academic integrity that we talk to students about, it's got to really come down to supporting them to develop their sort of self-regulation skills, because we know that students will look for an easy option when they're backed into a corner, or they're worried they've run out of time and they've got to submit something. So it's about trying to set them up early on with sort of systems and tools emotionally themselves to be able to understand where they might be able to do it. So they're not sort of hopefully in those sorts of situations where they're going to resort to it. And I mean, that's not new with AI. Obviously, we know, students will always get themselves into situations where they've run out of time, they haven't done something, they've procrastinated so long, and then they've got a due date, and that's when they'll sort of turn to an easy out. So, there's a lot of work to be done around giving them the tools to take forward for the rest of their lives, to be able to plan, to be able to advocate, to be able to sort of break things down so that they don't just sit there as these overwhelming things.
I think I want to just look across the water, back in Australia and down under for a second, because the UK's upcoming social media ban is explicitly modelled on the Australian take. But early data out of Australia shows that up to 70% of the children and young people kept their restricted accounts because platforms simply haven't forced age checks yet, and teenagers are bypassing rules using VPNs. Knowing how fast children adapt, how do we stop our school pastoral teams from becoming the default enforcement officers for a broken external system? I'll go to you first, Tony.
Great question. I I don't think we're there in Australia, well, at least in the schools that I'm aware of in Australia just yet. I do think that, I think before the ban came in, schools were very hopeful that this would solve a lot of the, I guess, outside of school issues that get brought into school through social media, through online activity, and that kind of thing. But I think what we have found since the ban is, yes, there is that piece where the apps are not enforcing the age. There's students know how to work around with the VPNs, but also I don't think parents are necessarily taking the responsibility for their own children here. And they are still they're still taking the approach where schools might help solve some of these issues. And they're sort of thinking, well, if the apps aren't banning them, then I'm not going to ban them. And I'm speaking for the kids who already have social media, where I do think where we are going to see a little bit more of a change. And I guess this is the same with any major policy reform, is this next generation of kids that don't already have social media. I think that's where we're really going to see an improvement in the social media use, online use, and the enforcement of the no social media under 16 law enforcement. Yeah. What do you think, Rach?
Yeah, I do. I think hopefully it will give those children who don't already have social media, it will give the parents a lot more permission to say no
Mm.
earlier. And I mean, I remember when my kids were, I think they were maybe 10 or 11 when they started saying, "Oh, my friends have got Instagram or my friends have got Snapchat." And, I'm a real rule follower, so I was holding firm on 13 is the age, and you cannot have it until 13. But, it's a lot of pressure because, some
Mm.
parents do sort of cave early, and it is really, really hard for schools. And I mean, we do have parent workshops where we try to sort of talk to them about it's okay to say no. And,
Mm.
your child's coming home saying everyone does this. And, this can be about social media. It can be about going to parties, alcohol, all those sorts of things. But I mean, it's not that everyone else is doing it.
Yeah.
And, talk to other parents and you'll quickly see that very few have that. So the hope with social media ban is not going to solve the kids who already had it and then were kicked off it briefly. Some were never kicked off it, or some. I mean, I know some of my children's friends. They were saying, oh, they just use their parents' faces to validate their information. But it's really hard. It's really hard to take it away once they had it. As Tony said, our real hope is for those kids who don't have it yet, and it may not be that parents feel like they can hold out till 16. Hopefully the apps can, take a lot more ownership and responsibility in making it impossible for kids to do it until they're 16. But hopefully they won't get it until a lot later on. So we won't see those 10-year-olds, 11-year-olds exposed to it. We know it's not healthy for young people to be accessing that really early on. So hopefully they will, have their childhood a little bit longer without
Yeah.
social media intruding. And that's only going to benefit schools because they won't be dealing with, as Tony said, everything that's happening offline outside school hours.
Yeah. I really think, just to add to that, even though there's been a policy change, there really needs to become a culture change, not just at schools, but within the wider community. I think the parents are having just as many issues around this as schools as students are. So there really needs to be an overarching culture change around our approach to social media in all three of those areas, I think.
And a modelling from parents as well about
Yeah.
it, because the amount of times you see adults that are on their phones.
Yeah.
We have a saying we have a really great comedy. I don't know if you've seen it over in Australia, called Miranda, and she always goes, "Bear with," when somebody's on on a phone. No, you've not seen that. But
No.
she has the friend who's always on a phone, and she just goes, bear with all the time. So this is a saying over here that if you see somebody and you're trying to have a conversation, you just go, bear with, while they're still on the phone. And I think there's more about that with adults, isn't there? About modelling our use
Definitely.
of social media, because we haven't grown up with it really, and we've been lucky that we haven't grown up with it. But actually now we've got other things that we're using as adults, and I think there's a real point there for adults to take the lead here as well.
So we're going to move to our favourite part of the show, or one of the favourite parts of the show. It's If I Only Knew. Tony, going to go to you first. When you first stepped into leadership, what do you wish somebody had told you about technology, change, and leading people through uncertainty?
Good question. I love hindsight. So good, isn't it? I think probably what I wish someone had told me about technology is that technology is really the hardest part of this conversation. And I think the hardest part is leading people through the uncertainty that comes along with technology. So when I first stepped into leadership, I probably thought that if a decision was well researched and clearly explained, educationally sound, then people would naturally come along with me. But change doesn't work like that. And that's not isolated to technology. People do not just respond to the idea, but we've already touched on this. They respond to how it impacts their own workload, how it impacts their confidence, which goes back to the question that we were just discussing around the students actually know more about this technology than the teachers half the time. It impacts their past experiences. I think a lot of the barriers here for teachers is that this form of education looks different to the one that they're used to, the one that they may have experienced, and that can take a huge amount of commitment to change that. And fear. We don't know much about this technology. Our generation as a whole knows less than the new up and coming generation. So there's fear that comes into it as well. And when we're introducing technology, we're not just introducing a tool, we're asking people to change their classroom routines, question their practice, learn a new language. Technology is a new language that we don't know yet. We're asking them to really take a risk, asking them to feel like a beginner again. And that's really putting us out of our comfort zone. So that can be really, really uncomfortable, especially when teachers have established a really effective practice that they have been practicing for a long period of time. So yeah, I guess what I wish someone had told me is to pay attention to the emotional load that comes along with change, as well as the practical load. People need training, we need systems, we need clear expectations, but we also need time.
Rachel, what would you tell the version of yourself who was taking on their first leadership role?
I think I would focus on technology or any change. You want it to be solving a problem. And so you need real clarity around what problem it's solving and how it's actually going to enhance the learning and teaching that's happening in our school. And it needs to be really slowly and clearly introduced to people. And you need to give people that time to build confidence. As Tony said, there's a lot of fear around any change, but when you couple change with technology, I think fears multiply greatly, because you have, particular generations of our teachers who are outstanding practitioners and who are very scared of different technologies that might be coming in. And yeah, as I said, the greatest fear is that we're going to lose teachers because they go, I didn't get into education to be spending my time learning how to code or learning how to be able to deal with this particular kind of technology. So we want to make sure that, we're still highlighting those things which attract people to this kind of profession. We know it's a caring profession, and technology doesn't always mesh well with that idea of caring and building really strong relationships. So we need to preserve what's really attractive about this profession to retain our quality practitioners and make sure that our students are still going to have the best teachers there with them, holding their hands through this new age.
So if you were a
Makes
head
sense.
teacher or a principal listening to this, driving to and from work, what one thing do you think next week you could suggest that would make their life easier for their colleagues? Rachel, what do you think? One thing.
I think the best thing leaders can do is really create a safe space for teachers to dip their toe in this brave new world, and give them permission to fail. Give them permission to try something and then go, that didn't work. I think it's if leaders can sort of model that for their teachers, I think it's far easier for teachers to model that with their students. uh, and then be going, I'm going to give this a go. It might not work, but we're going to try it. And then I'm going to ask you to give me some feedback about how this went. But when teachers are worried that they're going to get in trouble, that they're going to get it wrong, that it's going to be a waste of time, I think that's where you sort of see that real reluctance to try something new, or to mix up something they know works well with students generally. So creating that sort of culture where we're able to try things here, and we won't always get it right, and that's okay. And, knowing that the leaders are going to back them with parents, and being really transparent with parents about how we might be approaching technology in new ways is really important as well. But yeah, just permission to try, I think is really key.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, if you can get that right, the world is your oyster, really. And if you're doing that, you're modelling it for the children. Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much. What about you, Tony? What one
Yes,
thing
I
would you?
think one thing that I would advise, I guess, would be just for leaders to stop and streamline what they're really doing. Simplify, make life easier for staff is not giving them another tool. It can be sometimes about removing the digital noise, which is getting in the way of some of the work that happens, some of the most important work that happens within the classroom already. So before introducing a new tool, stop and consider. We've already touched on the ethical considerations, also the legal implications of introducing a new technology. But we all know that time is the most vital thing that schools desperately craving. So stop, streamline, do one thing and do it well.
Brilliant. Yeah, giving time. I mean, we are time poor as a profession, aren't we? We try and jam in so many things.
Okay, so before we finish, we want to pause for a moment, take a slow breath in and let it go. And now think about everything you've been carrying this week: the emails, the decisions, the conversations, the problems that landed on your desk. Now ask yourself, which of those things genuinely belong to me, and which have I picked up because nobody else knew where to put them? You need to remember that you don't have to carry everything, and you don't have to solve every problem today. Just one thing at a time is enough.
And technology isn't going away. Neither are the challenges that come with it. But perhaps one of the most important leadership skills now is knowing what deserves your attention and what deserves a boundary.
Today's conversation wasn't really about phones or AI or social media. It was about the people carrying responsibility for making sense of it all.
So if this conversation has reminded you how much of the digital world ends up landing in schools, you're certainly not alone. Please share this episode with a leader who's always looks fine on the outside, but might be carrying more than people realise.
You can find Tony and Rachel on the Stepping Into Ed Leadership podcast, which is certainly well worth a listen. Tony and Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's really early in the morning for you, though it's late at night for us. And I know it's very cold for you, and Jackie and I are sat here sweltering. So it's time to do.
I think it's about 31 still, and it's like 10:30 at night.
It's
So,
absolutely. Just, yeah. But thank you so much. It's so lovely to have a conversation with you both again. And we really appreciate you spending time and giving us your insight as well.
Thank you. It was great to chat to you again. Yes.
It was lovely to connect. We always love connecting with you both.
thank you. Thank you. Remember, leadership is hard, but you don't have to do it alone. We see you, we hear you, and we'll see you next time.